When you think of American horror, what is the very first thing that comes to mind? For many of us, it's not just the chilling visuals or the heart-pounding music, it's the title. A truly great horror title is a work of art in itself, instantly setting a tone, sparking a dangerous curiosity, and giving us a taste of the dread to come. But crafting that perfect title isn't a matter of simply slapping a few scary words together. The art of American horror title generation is a refined and fascinating process, one rooted in history, culture, and a deep understanding of what truly makes us afraid. The journey begins in the early 20th century, when films like Dracula and Frankenstein borrowed directly from classic literature. These titles were simple, iconic, named after the monsters themselves, instantly recognizable and brutally direct. But as the genre evolved, so did its titles. By the 1960s and 70s, the landscape had shifted. Titles like Night of the Living Dead and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre emerged, planting a seed of terror in a specific time and place. Notice how these titles conjure a scene in your mind before you've even watched a single frame. They don't just name the threat, they immerse you in it. This evolution continued into the 1980s and 90s, an era when slasher films reigned supreme. Think of A Nightmare on Elm Street or Friday the 13th. These titles have a rhythm, an alliteration, a sense of place and time that feels almost folkloric. Elm Street could be any suburban neighborhood, making the horror feel closer to home. Friday the 13th invokes an ominous date, tapping into superstitions that are universally understood. The titles themselves became part of the legend, whispered at sleepovers and scrawled in the margins of notebooks. But what makes a horror title truly effective? There's a formula at work, though it's not always obvious.
First, the language. American horror titles tend to use short, punchy words: scream, evil, curse, blood. These are words that trigger primal fears and ignite the imagination. Second, there's ambiguity. Consider The Blair Witch Project. The title doesn't tell you exactly what the threat is, but your mind races to fill in the blanks. Ambiguity breeds anticipation, and anticipation is the lifeblood of horror. Third, there's the power of suggestion. Titles like Get Out, Us, or It Follows don't reveal much on the surface, but they hint at a looming danger, a necessary action, or a mysterious presence. They invite the audience to ask questions, and that curiosity is what draws us in. Finally, American horror titles often tap into the cultural anxieties of their time. During the Cold War, titles like Invasion of the Body Snatchers resonated with fears of the unknown other. In the 2000s, with the rise of found footage, titles like Paranormal Activity played on the terrifying blend of our reality and digital fiction. A title is a doorway, beckoning us inside, daring us to see what lurks in the shadows. But what happens when we step through that door? The most potent horror often wears a mask of the mundane, hiding not in haunted castles, but in the places we are taught to trust the most. Places of healing, places of science, places like hospitals. Let's step behind the sterile curtains and into the often unseen, unsettling side of the American healthcare system. Far from television drama or urban legend, these are the narratives that have emerged from within hospital walls, shared by patients, nurses, and doctors. They reveal how bureaucracy, understaffing, and profound neglect can sometimes turn a place of healing into a setting for chilling, real-life horror. Consider the story of a 24-year-old named Emily who checked into an emergency room with severe abdominal pain.
After hours of waiting in a crowded hallway, she was finally admitted, but her cries for help went largely ignored as overworked nurses dashed from room to room. Her ruptured appendix was misdiagnosed as simple food poisoning, and by the time the error was discovered, she was fighting for her life in intensive care. This isn't an isolated case. A 2016 Johns Hopkins study estimated that more than 250,000 Americans die each year from medical errors, making it the third leading cause of death in the United States. Behind each statistic lies a story like Emily's, a terrifying brush with mortality caused not by illness alone, but by the very system meant to save her. Then there are the hushed tales from the night shift nurses, who recount moments when staff shortages forced them to care for twice as many patients as is considered safe. One nurse described a night when she managed a ward of 18 patients completely alone. She recalled the quiet horror of finding an elderly patient unresponsive after missing multiple rounds, an outcome that, with proper staffing, could have been prevented. These stories underscore a reality where overwhelmed staff must make impossible choices, sometimes with devastating consequences. Patients frequently recount experiences of being ignored or dismissed because of their insurance status or a perceived drug-seeking behavior. Take the case of Michael, who arrived at a hospital with chest pain. Because he was uninsured, he claims he waited nearly 5 hours before being seen. By then, he had suffered a mild heart attack. Studies show that uninsured patients are more likely to be misdiagnosed or discharged prematurely, highlighting a chilling disparity in care. Even mundane procedures can take a dark turn. In 2018, a woman in Seattle was left awake, fully aware but paralyzed, during surgery due to an anesthesia error.
She later described the sensation as being buried alive. Such cases, though rare, are not unheard of. They illustrate the unique terror that can result from just one lapse in protocol. These stories, while sometimes sensational, are grounded in fact, echoed by watchdog organizations and patient advocacy groups. They raise urgent questions about hospital safety, communication breakdowns, and the human cost of an overburdened healthcare system. For every miraculous recovery, there are untold accounts of fear, trauma, and loss, reminders that hospitals, while places of hope, can also be settings for true horror. And sometimes that horror takes on a form that defies all explanation. Picture the fluorescent hum of a hospital corridor at 3 a.m. The world outside is asleep, but inside, the night shift is just beginning. Across the American South, countless nurses, doctors, and staff have whispered about strange, chilling events that seem to come alive when the night is at its deepest. Tonight, we delve into 7 terrifying encounters that have both haunted and bonded the night workers of Southern hospitals. Our journey begins in a rural Louisiana emergency room where the staff joke about the Gray Lady. She's an apparition in an old-fashioned nurse's cap, seen only in the ICU. One night, a new nurse, Sarah, spots her walking past the supply closet. Thinking it's a colleague, she calls out, but the woman vanishes into thin air. A moment later, the heart monitor in a nearby room flatlines. The veteran staff say the Gray Lady only appears before a patient passes, her silent warning to the living. From Louisiana, we travel to a historic hospital in Savannah, Georgia, built atop a Civil War battlefield. Janitors refuse to clean the basement alone. One orderly, Marcus, recounts pushing a supply cart when he hears the distinct sound of boots marching on the linoleum behind him. He turns. No one's there. The air grows icy and the lights flicker.
Security footage later shows shadowy figures passing through the hallway, though not a single security badge was scanned that night. Further north, in a small Alabama maternity ward, lullabies sometimes echo from empty rooms. Nurse Carla remembers a night when an old, out-of-tune music box played by itself. Moments later, a call light blinks in a room that's been vacant for weeks. When she checks, the crib inside is gently rocking, but there's no baby. Staff whisper that it's the spirit of a mother who lost her child during a 1940s polio outbreak, eternally searching. A hospital in the Mississippi Delta has an elevator with a mind of its own. Late one night, Dr. Patel steps in, intending to go up, but the elevator descends to the deserted psychiatric ward on the bottom floor. The doors open to pitch-black silence, the only sound of faint sobbing echoing from the end of the hall. He waits, frozen, until the doors finally close and return him to safety. It's said the sobbing belongs to a patient who vanished from that ward decades ago and was never found. On the night shift in a Texas trauma center, physicians sometimes see a child in hospital pajamas sprinting down the corridor. Security never catches him. He always vanishes near the old pediatric wing, which was closed after a fire in the 1980s. Staff have found tiny, unexplainable handprints on the glass doors of the sealed-off wing. Impossible, since no one has been inside for years. In a North Carolina hospice, the cloying scent of gardenias often fills the air just hours before a patient slips away. No flowers are ever brought in. Nurse Tom, a skeptic, brushed it off, until one night the fragrance overwhelmed him just as an elderly woman passed peacefully in her sleep. Now he sees it not as a haunting, but as a final, gentle farewell. This is the magnetic, unsettling power of regional horror.
What is it about these tales, rooted in specific landscapes, whispered in local dialects, and shaped by generations of belief, that makes them linger in our minds? The dark allure of regional horror lies in its uncanny ability to blend the familiar with the unknown, transforming everyday settings into landscapes of dread. At the heart of regional horror is the idea of place. Unlike generic ghost stories, it is deeply entwined with its environment. Think of the moss-draped swamps of Louisiana, where the legend of the rougarou, a fearsome, shape-shifting werewolf, prowls the bayous. Or the deserts of the Southwest, where tales of skinwalkers persist. These stories are inseparable from their settings. The landscape isn't just a backdrop, it's a living, breathing character. The whisper of wind through cypress trees, the oppressive heat of the desert. These sensory details immerse us, making the horror feel tangible and close. Regional horror also draws its power from the weight of history and culture. These tales become vessels for collective anxieties and warnings passed down to explain the unexplainable. In Appalachia, stories of strange creatures in the hills reflect the isolation of rural life. In Mexico, La Llorona, the weeping woman said to haunt riversides, serves as both a cautionary tale for children and a symbol of grief and loss, echoing through centuries. These legends are sticky. They adhere to the places and people who tell them, evolving with each retelling, but always grounded in local reality. Another reason regional horror haunts us is its intimacy. The monsters in these stories aren't distant, abstract threats. They're said to lurk just beyond the tree line or in the old, abandoned building down the road. Often, the tales are recounted by someone who heard it from a friend or a relative, making the danger feel immediate and plausible. This personal connection blurs the line between fiction and reality, making us question what might be waiting in the darkness just outside our own window. Ultimately, the dark allure of regional horror comes from this perfect storm, a blend of place, history, and personal connection that makes each story feel as if it could happen to anyone or has already happened just down the road. It's this proximity, both physical and emotional, that keeps us listening for footsteps in the night and leaves us forever haunted by the shadows of our own backyards.